Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome once again to the JKMRC Friday Seminar Series. Before we begin, on behalf of the University of Queensland and Sustainable Minerals Institute, we'd like to acknowledge the Turrbal and Jagera people as the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which we meet today. We pay our respects to their ancestors and descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connection with country, and we recognise their valuable contribution to Australian and global society. I'm excited today to be heading back to the topic of minerals exploration for our seminar this morning. Today we're diving into a discussion around how the looming copper supply gaps in copper production can be filled to meet the long-term demand that's being driven by electrification and decarbonisation. And specifically, how Rio Tinto, one of the world's largest copper producers, is responding to meet these challenges. It's my great pleasure today to introduce Mr. Russ Eley. Russ is the Head of Exploration Data Science at Rio Tinto. Prior to this, he's had a distinguished career as an Exploration Geo working in remote locations across the globe, exploring for a wide range of commodities. His presentation today is titled, How Much Copper Has Really Been Discovered and What Are the Implications for Meeting Future Demand? Please join me with me in welcoming Russ Eley.
All right. Thanks very much, Tom. Quick mic check. Hope everyone can hear me okay. So yeah, the pretty simple question, how much copper has really been found? I'm not going to give you all of the answers, so I apologize in advance. This will raise more questions than answers, I hope, but it's a topic that I've been really quite fascinated in for over a decade. We'll kind of explore that a little bit in a minute. And I think it's a question that's becoming more and more important now with the real surge in expected demand through electrification. So before I start, cautionary statement. Look, this work, really most of it is public domain, and that's one of the joys of, and I think interesting things about this data that I'm going to show you. Most of it's public domain, but definitely respect that a lot of work that other people have done that's behind this, and so I'm just privileged, honoured to be here, as a bit of a voice for lots of people. I'm going to pad out the talk a little bit and tell you a little bit about me, but there's a reason, for doing that, and I kind of consider myself almost to be a bit of a metaphor for something that the industry is going through at the moment. And I'll elaborate on that as I go through, but as Tom said, look, I currently, based here in Brisbane, been here for almost 4 years. Starting way over on the right there, but I currently head up Rio Tinto's exploration data science team, and definitely not a data scientist, never coded in my life. I'm a geoscientist, and I've been busy around the world exploring for many commodities for 26, 27 years now. I grew up in the UK. That's my old house in Liverpool. As far from the career in the world that I've had, I've seen, since then. But I really kind of, like to just call out the fact, sitting there in Liverpool, it's kind of where I first developed a love and interest in geology. I'd be hiking up in the mountains in the surrounding areas at weekends and just curious, kicking over rocks. What are these? And that led to studying geology at Leeds Uni. Wasn't very good, bit of an average student. But I was quite passionate. I just loved the field, and I really that's what's just kind of helped me through my career in the years since then. After I graduated in '96, flew to Australia, flew to Perth to look for work, and ended up with a job in Kenya, of all places. So in a big kind of whirlwind of excitement, I ended up exploring for gold in Kenya with zero gold experience. Had no idea what I was doing. Learned on the job. Very exciting times. Down close to the Tanzanian border. Moving on to Angola, I had almost 10 years in Angola, mining alluvial diamonds initially, exploring for alluvial diamonds, and then moving into the hard rock, the kimberlite space. And I was like a kid in a candy store, just learning about kimberlites and these fascinating rocks. So super stimulating, period of my career. I joined BHP. After working with what I'll respectfully describe as cowboy companies for a number of years in Angola, I then joined BHP when the Civil War ended and some of the major companies started to move back into the country. And then from there, really, it was that role with BHP, and I was fortunate to be teamed up with people who kind of helped me, pivot my career to what I was really passionate about. Up to that point, I'd been an operational geologist working on individual projects, but I'm a big picture thinker. And I was always thinking about, well, what's on the next permit or in the next country, next continent? And so this is where I kind of moved into, with BHP in South Africa and then Singapore, moved into global multi-commodity target generation. I joined Rio in 2011 in Vancouver for a very similar role, multi-commodity global target gen. Really up to that point, most of my experience was still diamonds, but I was increasingly looking at copper around the world and targeting different deposit types. And yeah, just learning a massive amount, again, huge amount of fun. And obviously Canada, beautiful place. Moved to Salt Lake City, another beautiful place with Rio. And that move was to head up an Americas-wide exploration generative team. So it was my team's job really to kind of get out and try to get creative, identifying early stage opportunities across North and South America. And then almost done here. So back in 2019, I moved here to Brisbane. I actually had a stint with Rio's corporate relations team. All through this journey, one of the things that's really defined me is a bit of a contradiction. I love the mining industry. I'm a treasure hunter. I find it super exciting trying to find new stuff. But I also love nature. All of these places that I've worked in, one of the appeals of living and working in these places has been the wildlife, the people, just the environments that I was lucky enough to spend time in. A bit of a contradiction, and that's a bit of a flavor that I think, or the metaphor that I mentioned for our industry right now. Most of us in this business, we love nature, we're conflicted. How do we balance that love of nature with really meeting society's needs for metals? So that stint with corporate relations, I think it taught me a lot about some wider elements, aspects of kind of ESG risks, sustainability kind of era that we are currently in. And then 3 years ago, I put my hand up to set up this exploration data science team. So that's a bit about me. Why am I passionate about this topic? As I mentioned, I consider myself a bit of an environmentalist. And I've been vegetarian since I was 10 on environmental grounds. Love being out in nature. But I love my gadgets. I love the creature comforts. I love the society that I'm part of. And there's that contradiction, but finding that right balance for me is really what drives me in my work. How do we meet this incredible demand for copper and other commodities that is being forecast? How do we meet that without really massively negatively impacting the environment? I think we can do it. It's not going to be easy, but it's really trying to figure that out that drives me in my work. So what is the challenge? So this data here comes from S&P Global, and I'm going to be citing a bunch of their data throughout the talk. But they published last year a really fascinating report where they set out to answer this simple question. How much copper will need to be mined, produced, available to meet global net zero targets by 2050? And so the whole report is dedicated to that. And basically, this is what they concluded. Last year, the mining industry produced about 22 million tons of copper, plus or minus, to meet about 25 million tons of contained copper demand. The rest was recycling. So that was last year. They're projecting that to meet these net zero targets, demand will have to increase to close to 50 million tons of contained copper. It's going to have to double by 2035 and then remain at similar levels through and beyond 2050. So that doubling of demand to meet these goals that society is setting itself, that places a massive kind of burden on our industry. It's a massive challenge, but it's a massive opportunity. And this is obviously one of the reasons why I'm quite passionate about this and really kind of trying to understand, well, how do we rise to that challenge? Before I move on, I actually just want to point out, so there is a lot of, obviously talk around this increased demand coming from electrification, but that's only a portion of the story. So you can see in the gray bars there is that proportion of future demand that would come from energy transition, batteries, turbines, and so on. But the greens are just kind of more traditional uses of copper. Those uses of copper are not going away. So really a 1-2 punch of increasing demand forecast for a wide variety of uses. So to help understand, well, how are we going to meet that future demand? For me, a really important question is, are we finding enough? And one of the reasons I'm quite interested in this topic and presenting it today is that there are some very frustrating misconceptions around this question. How much copper has been found? And so I've grabbed some screen grabs here from articles published over the last couple of years. Super easy to find similar articles being published this year, last year, every year for the last probably 20 years or so. You'll see very similar narrative in the media. Addressing the copper exploration crisis. The world is struggling to find more copper. The discovery drought continues. So that chart on the bottom right, we're going to explore that chart in particular in a minute, but just want to give a shout out. So that data and the company that produced that chart, and a bunch of the charts that you'll see shortly, S&P Global, their data really is amazing. They do a fantastic job of compiling global data that makes jobs for people like me much easier. But there's some quirks in how they present the data sometimes, which has been something that I want to demystify today. But you can look at that chart, and these charts are kind of updated every year and published every year by S&P. And then they're widely cited by the industry and companies really hang a lot of onto charts like that and data like that. And you can see why this narrative of the world's running out of copper and an exploration crisis, you see why that kind of sentiment is so strong. So that chart is showing the amount of copper in reserves and major discoveries compared to the total exploration spend for copper by the industry. And so you can see in the last, 20 years or so, that we've seen this amazing amount of spend, but no real, discoveries, or fewer discoveries to show for it. And so that's quite an alarming story. So let's look at that in a little bit more detail. So I've just reformatted that chart. This is one that they published in 2020. And it includes, one of their quotes, less than 1 million tons of copper discovered since 2015. So again, what are we looking at? The bars are contained copper in resources, millions of tons. And the green line is the copper exploration budgets in billions of dollars in 2021 dollars. So again, you can see here this really alarming disparity. Look how much the industry is spending exploring for copper, but it's just not delivering. But there's a problem with this data, or at least how it's presented. On the right is S&P's own data. We're presenting it differently. So we're still showing the total amount of exploration spend. And that total comes from grassroots spend, advanced exploration spend, so feasibility study and so on. That includes mine site exploration spend, people drilling additional resources, growing their resources at existing mines. So that's what that total spend is representing. And in the background, you can see, and there's my quote now, more than 300 million tons of contained copper has been discovered since 2015. So why the difference? Why on one hand are we being told that less than 1 million tons has been discovered, but I'm telling you that 300 million tons has been discovered. So it's really kind of how the data is presented. So in the chart on the right, most of that spend, the majority of that spend, that record spend, was drilling resources in expanding resources in discoveries, some of which were made decades ago. So a deposit like Escondida, that count an amazing discovery back in 1981, I believe it was. But Escondida started out as a modest-sized discovery. It quickly grew, but since then, BHP and the partners, including Rio, spent a lot of time drilling that resource, expanding that resource. And a lot of that spend is captured in that green line there. However, all of that copper discovered in the years subsequent to the original discovery, all of that copper is accounted back to the original discovery year in the way this sort of data is traditionally presented. So we get a disparity that we're seeing the money spent delineating new resources and expanding resources, but we're not seeing the copper that's delivered. That's been pushed back to 1980, for example. And so when you wind back for every deposit and actually say, okay, when, and align when companies reported spending X dollars and delivered or increased their resources by X tons, when you align them back, as the chart on the right is showing, you get a much clearer picture of how much copper is really being found. There's copper being discovered in new discoveries still, and we'll look at that in a bit more detail in a second. But there's been some really huge brownfield resource increases that are easy to kind of overlook when you're not tracking the data properly. So yeah, a lot of that spend during the China boom was just growing, delineating huge new resources at existing assets. And now for me, those are discoveries, and you can get into semantics, but those are all supply options, is what it boils down to. So chart on the left, you can really understand the narrative. It fuels a narrative of the world's running out of copper, getting much more expensive to find every single ton of copper. Whereas the chart on the right gives you a much different narrative. Another cause for confusion or misunderstandings around discovery rates, again, sticking with copper, we're just tracking here the number of major discoveries reported year by year. So this chart is from Minex Consulting, again, another fantastic source of data, really great setup, team based in Perth. I use the data a lot and really love the data. It makes my job so much easier. But again, how you interpret it is where there's some opportunities, to really kind of shed some fresh light on things. So this chart was published in 2011, and at the time, there's that rising exploration industry spend, the red line, and you can see there was an alarming declining number of discoveries reported in the preceding decade. So that's what the black line, the black arrow is highlighting. And it was fueling, at the time, concerns. Well, we're spending more than ever. We're spending record price, record amounts of money exploring for copper, but the number of discoveries is declining. Fast forward a decade, and this was the picture that had emerged. And really, what it tells us that at the time, we thought we had a good angle on how many discoveries were being made back in 2011, but we didn't. There were actually many more discoveries that hadn't been reported, or they hadn't been drilled enough to grow to meet the threshold of being a major discovery. And again, let me just jump back, but you can just see how these perceptions around declining discovery rates. One of the reasons for that perception is just can take time to report, grow resources, and we just need to keep it in mind looking forward now when we ask ourselves, well, how much copper is being found today? Will we be finding enough to help meet future demand? There is a caveat here, and I'll put that in the notes on the right, that maybe at this time, the number of discoveries really has been declining in the last decade. And the reason is this correlation with exploration spend. So spend really started to drop off in 2012. And that's when we start to see this real decline in the number of discoveries. So time will tell. I will show you some examples of where we now know, even 2-3 years later, that there are more discoveries that are not captured in this chart that have been made in the last 5 years. But time will tell whether we're going to have as many discoveries as, say, 10 years ago or 20 years ago being made per year today, given the fact that the industry is spending less than it was during the boom. So this is still sticking with the number of reported copper discoveries. I'm using some slightly different size thresholds here. And the data is more recent. This is, again, from Minix Consulting. And this is data accurate to as of last month. Again, this is reported discoveries that meet a certain size threshold. So the darker reds are giant resources as we know them today, with all the drilling that's been done today. And then the lighter colors are, major, and then just smaller resources. I've used a minimum cutoff of 1 million tons of contained copper for this data. And then the black line is grassroots early stage exploration spend in today's dollars. So you can still see that decline in the number of discoveries in the last decade, really quite closely correlated with the spend. But there's been a bit of an uptick in spend and an uptick in the number of discoveries since 2016. So you just start to see this link between how much the industry is spending and how much it's actually finding. Really important link. The table on the right, I just grabbed 20 of the most recent giant discoveries. So the darker red symbols there, I've just captured the 20 most recent ones. And they include some very recent discoveries, 2021, 2020, back to 2015. And if you just cast your mind back a few slides, from that quote from S&P, less than 1 million tons of copper discovered since 2015, that's plainly misleading, or that data just wasn't available at the time, reporting the delays. So if we just look at the resource size for those discoveries highlighted here and reported since 2015, there's a lot of tons of copper in those deposits. It's already been drilled, already been reported, and I'm pretty sure that many of them are going to grow to become even bigger. So again, just have to be careful, interpreting this sort of data, trying to figure out just how much copper will be found. Still elaborating on this, this is actually data for diamond deposits, giant diamond deposits. But you can see the same thing in copper deposits and really many different types of deposits. And the simple message is that it can take decades for giant deposits to grow to become giants. We often recognize that potential early, within a few years, but it's really decades of drilling, expensive drilling, to grow a system like Iraq or Argyle, a massive amount of money that you're spending to grow those resources. These are all, just additional supply options. So we kind of think, and we often look at those giant deposits, and Escondida made back in the 80s, or Collahuasi, just fantastic discoveries. And we wish, we kind of feel that we can click our fingers and make new similar discoveries of that size. And we often feel that someone clicked their finger at the time and just discovered these giant deposits, but there's really a lot of effort, a lot of spend over decades, and lots of drilling that made us appreciate and realize the full size potential of these deposits. Some of these diamond deposits are still getting bigger, decades after they were discovered, and these are some of the biggest mines in the world. And they keep finding additional resources. And it's the same story for many of the world's largest copper deposits. I just highlighted the year that each of those deposits entered production. And again, just to highlight the point that that's often when things just start to get even more interesting in terms of resource growth. Once the production started, once you have infrastructure and the teams start to really understand that those deposits are, even larger resource increases can occur. So I kind of told you that there is far more copper that's been discovered than people realize. So, and new discoveries continue to be made. new giant discoveries continue to be made last year and the year before even. So we've got plenty to meet this looming, demand increase, right? Well, not so fast. So there's that demand forecast from S&P Global again. Again, this, the caveat is that demand may never reach those sort of levels, but this is hypothetical. If we are to achieve net zero by 2050, this is roughly how much demand, how much copper will be needed to meet that. So there are really four ways that we can increase demand to increase supply to meet that demand. We can develop mines from new discoveries. We can develop mines from the backlog of known resources. We can increase production at existing mines, and we can increase recycling. We're going to have to do all of that to achieve those demand increases. I'm going to focus really on the top two, increasing supply from new mines, new mines from new discoveries, and new mines from the backlog of known discoveries, historical discoveries. Bit of a noisy slide here, so I'll take my time and kind of step through it, and I might just read some of it. I'll apologize, but the chart on the left is really a consolidation of, when you kind of unpack and really more accurately account for when copper resources and reserves were being made, instead of making the mistake in assigning every ton back to an original discovery year. When you unpack all of that, you get a clearer picture of the global resource base, I call it. And so we're looking at contained metal on the vertical axis in billions of tons. And that green shaded area in the background is resources, reported resources, remaining in the ground after production. And the gray is reserves, remaining in the ground today after production. And then there's a little red line you can see at the bottom. That's annual production. So there is a massive amount of copper out there in reserves and resources. The blue lines are copper price and copper exploration spend. And then I've highlighted in a little circle 500 million tons of copper. That is what S&P Global estimate total demand will need to be between now and 2035 in order to meet those net zero goals. So there's more than enough copper, even in reserves, but certainly when you factor in resources. But we'll unpack that a little bit in the next few minutes. But another, I think, important thing to note in that chart is that, during the China boom, there were record prices. You can see them as that solid blue line. Those record copper prices incentivized record exploration, and it delivered record growth of resources and reserves. Huge discoveries, really incredible what the industry managed to do during that period. However, since 2012, when prices softened, exploration expenditures just really tanked. The rate of growth of resources and reserves has plateaued. And so really the industry has struggled since 2012 to convert this huge backlog of resources, struggle to convert them into reserves, basically struggle to convert them into mineable resources. So great, pat ourselves on the back. We've got a map. We've done a job well done. Look at these massive resources we've found, but we're struggling to get them into production. That leads to the middle figure here, and that's the chart. I hope it's familiar to everyone in this room. It's from this team, and this is just an estimate or quantification of various risks associated with undeveloped copper deposits around the world. And it really highlights one of the challenges, really, that I think that we have, ties to that huge backlog of resources that exist. Many of them have challenges, technical challenges, too low grade, maybe there's high arsenic. Many of them have non-technical challenges, really the right deposits in the wrong places. And this is really one of big challenges for our industry today. It's less about having enough copper to meet future demand. It's having enough copper that we can mine and society is happy for us to mine to meet society's demand for all that metal. So yeah, a substantial proportion of these discoveries and these resources, including things discovered during the China boom, they remain undeveloped, including examples of right deposits in the wrong places. Taken together, these two factors drive, in my opinion, the importance of finding the right deposits in the right places. So it's easier said than done, because what does that actually mean? What does a right deposit look like? What do the right places look like? I actually don't have the answers to that, but that's something for the industry to solve. What is right has actually changed. The goalposts move, society's expectations change. One area that may have been a great place to mine 50 years ago, the situation might be very different today. So it's really tough to pin down what makes the right deposit and the right location. And that is one of the challenges that we have. But the chart is that on the right is showing average development times for significant copper deposits. So these are larger deposits, 5-year rolling average since 1960. And so it really speaks to, as you can see, the average is really increasing at an alarming rate. And it speaks to these challenges of getting new mines into production, land access issues, community issues, environmental issues, grades just not quite there, there's geotech issues. So all of this stuff just means it's taking longer and longer to get stuff into production. There is an important catch here, and that chart is basically also reflecting and partly the result of this growing pool of discoveries. Every year as new discoveries are made, we have a growing bucket of supply options, including older discoveries that can get into production. So they kind of skew the average year after year to longer and longer development times, because there are discoveries made decades ago that start to look more interesting now that the price has gone up, for example. And so it's a bit of a distorted view, but it's still a very relevant view, and really speaks to the reality that it can take a long time to get these new discoveries into production. We can be talking decades, and I'll show you some actual numbers in a second. How do we buck that trend really is one of our challenges and opportunities. We don't want to be making discoveries today that are going to take 30 years to get into production. That's the average at the moment. That's not going to help us meet the escalating copper demand. How do we reduce those timescales, those development times? So pausing really just for a bit of discussion, and I'm almost done with the slides. So yeah, how do we meet this challenge? How do we find better resources? For me, this is the challenge. We don't just need to find more copper resources. There's plenty of copper. We're doing great at the job of finding copper. What we need is better resources, better technically, but also from a non-technical point of view. Right deposits in the right places. How do we do that? So look, I head up a data science team, and I could talk to the cows come home about all of the cool stuff that the gadgets and the analytics that we're bringing to bear to try to help map, discover, prioritize better deposits. But I'll probably just suffice to say, look, we have an amazing suite of tools and data at our disposal to try to answer these questions. We're certainly doing our best to leverage this amazing amount of data and new tech to do that. But it is tough, and this is the industry has some challenges. It takes more than just new tech, new data, new analytics to make discoveries. That's why I like this picture here in particular, is because really what's changed in the life of a geoscientist in the last 50 years. Boots on ground skills are as important as ever. We just have more tools, more data, almost too much data to make sense of. But this is one of the opportunities that the industry now has. How do we leverage that data? How do we distill it? How do we use analytics to make sense of this amazing data we now have available to support our teams in the ground? How do we get better at prioritizing discoveries that can be developed into mines quickly and responsibly? Like I said, those average development times 25, 30 years just ain't going to cut it. We don't want to be making discoveries or investing in discoveries that are going to take that long to get into production, or actually are going to stall and will never get into production. How do we recognize deposits that have got the potential to be fast-tracked? That doesn't mean cutting corners and ignoring communities and plowing through forests. It means, where are the deposits that have the best chance to have the least, the lowest, negative impacts, and that we get, community, society support to get into production quickly. It's a challenge, but there's actually there was some, I'd say some good examples in the last decade where companies have succeeded, have managed to do that. And so they give us some good learnings about the sorts of areas that we perhaps should be prioritizing, areas that will have a lower impact if a big discovery is made there. So we really need to be considering these things. How do we get better at evaluating targets more efficiently and effectively? Related questions here, but again, comes back to the time it takes us to go from the first drill hole to starting, delineating the resource and then getting it into production. It takes too long. A lot of those factors are out of our control, but some of those factors are in our control. And so, there's a lot that we can do in terms of, making our workflows, our decision-making processes more efficient to reduce those timelines. And then the last point, how do we get better at unlocking supply from the backlog of undeveloped deposits? Those massive resources that I showed you, those supply options, some of them have challenges that can be unlocked. Some of them, they're just, it might just be a higher copper price. It might be a new processing technique that suddenly makes that deposit economic. Some of them have, bigger red flag issues that I just struggle to see them being solved. Right deposits, wrong locations, but there are big opportunities and known resources around the world that can contribute to meeting this escalating demand. And I guess almost, maybe two parting points. One is what I've said on the right there. With all of this said, has there ever been a more exciting time to be part of this industry? One of the reasons it's interesting is it's hard, but that's why we're up to the challenge. We enjoy the challenge. If it was easy, we wouldn't have a job. It would be boring. So with the challenge comes opportunity, and that's really why I love this industry still. Another parting thought, and my final thought is, well, what if we don't meet that challenge? What's going to happen if we actually can't, as an industry, step up to meet that demand for net zero goals? Who are the winners? Who are the losers? What's going to happen to the copper price? There's all sorts of kind of ramifications you can imagine if the industry doesn't figure out how to solve this. Lots to unpack there. Not enough time to unpack it today, and I think I'm done. So, any questions?
Thanks very much, Russ. We have a question from you.
Russ, great job. Really enjoyed it. And I remember your comment to me a couple of years ago now about that disparity between exploration expenditure and when the tons of copper were actually found, and yeah, it's absolutely right. And it is kind of creeping into people's ideas a little bit. I've heard from a few people now say, "Oh, we don't have to find new deposits of copper. We can just take the projects that are already in production, grow their resources, and it'll all be fine." So I actually had a look, doing a talk at this mining conference, because we did that analysis of ours that showed this from 2018, and so we redid it like a verification to 2023, and actually looked at the change in production. And the change in production for existing copper deposits between 2018 and 2023 was minus 500,000 tons of copper. So that's not going to work. It ain't going to work. We were saved by Kamoa, Kakula, and Quellaveco, and so we got to keep, we've got to keep finding ways to, as I said, putting the new ones into production. But have you factored that sort of thinking in is that I think you can grow the resources, but what we're seeing is that the declines in existing deposits are, at least for the last 5 years, more than eating up the gains.
So I'll be honest, I haven't done a deep dive, but it's certainly something that I consider. With a bit of hindsight, I should have gone the next step. There's more work to be done here to really understand, and really with support from you guys. Of those existing deposits, a pool of known deposits, even upside potential of existing mines. How close can we get to meeting that future demand? What do those numbers look like? I actually don't have those concrete numbers, but I agree with you. It's going to be tough. And one thing that kind of is apparent to me at the moment is that copper price is actually doing pretty well at the moment. After those falls from 2020, 2012, 2016, the price is on the rise again. Exploration expenditures are tracking and starting to respond, but they're not responding as much as I would have expected. So what does that tell me? That maybe there isn't the sense of urgency that the industry needs. A lot of people don't appreciate this kind of looming challenge that we have. And so we might just kind of get caught with our, socks down, and we're just, panicking over the next few years, trying to catch up with this demand, as happened during the China boom, with projects, companies trying to ramp up production of existing assets. I don't feel I see that sense of urgency at the moment, but at some point, if supply demand kind of gap does start to open up and these pressures start to increase, that'll pressure prices up. That'll certainly start to incentivize more companies to start trying to see what they can do to increase output, turn some of those historical discoveries into new mines. So something doesn't quite add up at the moment. That urgency is not there. The price is good, but the industry isn't responding with a sense of urgency that I would have expected. But I suspect it's going to come.
Thanks, Russell. Love that. The word resources bandied around as a term that various meanings, but hidden in that is this basically the word eventual economic extraction. How much do you think that word eventual is actually over or underused in this whole resources world? Because you're saying there that some are never going to be, and they're in the wrong place. Now, should they actually be called resources? And I know they're thinking about getting rid of the word eventual in that definition at the moment. What's your thoughts there?
Yeah, look, I would agree. I will again admit, not my area of expertise, for deep dive, response on this. But one perspective I have is that during the China boom, I'll call it that, there was really a race fueled by this narrative that the world's running out of copper. We just need to discover more copper. This narrative emerged and this race emerged to find bigger deposits. Let's report bigger deposits. It was really a race. And so that you saw, some really amazing discoveries, resources being announced, including, as you're saying, resources that, maybe they have future potential. So look, there was a bit of a flavor to the industry during that period in particular, of, let's just try to drill out volume more than value. Things have changed a lot since then. And I think people are just going to realize that we need high quality resources that we can quickly get into reserves and quickly get into production. These massive resources that look great on paper, they were I guess a symptom of the times, and that narrative of we just need more copper. Doesn't matter what the grade is or where those deposits are, we just need more. Things are changing.
Thank you very much. I wanted to follow up on Russ and next further points. Yes, we have resources and we have a question about whether or not those resources are minable, and some of them are not. But the question, I think, that gets even less fast is, are those resources purchasable? Can you actually step up? And at the moment, the only real indicator that we see out there in the data is the head grades of the deposits, because you can measure that. But the head grade is increasingly becoming a much poorer indicator of whether or not we can get the metal out of the water. And I would really like to see an increased measurement of indicators that would at least give an idea of just the sheer scale of the challenge of getting the metal out of ore A versus ore B. Is that something that's even being looked at?
I'm going to ask the room. I hope so. Look, as an industry, yeah, those are exactly the sort of questions we need to be addressing and solving. I'll I can answer, it's not really directly answering your question, but another kind of reflection of mine regarding head grades, declining head grades. Part of the narrative has been that, the narrative, that we hang on this very real, the global declining head grades. The narrative is, look, we're being forced to mine lower grades. Another spin on that is that, well, we're mining those lower grades because we can, and we can make money from that now with these amazing technological breakthroughs. So are we being forced to, or are we doing it because we realize we can make money mining those lower grades? So there's some nuance there, but I suspect, all global average ore grades are going to decline. These newer mines in the DRC, high grade, those copper deposits, are actually going to lift those global averages for a time. But technology is doing amazing things to actually help us mine more ore, and I might bring it on. That's the more that we can mine from our existing assets, extend the life of those assets, where frankly the environmental damage has already been done. We've got the mine there, we've got the infrastructure there. Let's those are responsible places to be, striving to meet future demand. So the more metal we can get at lower grades in those deposits, the better.
So we've got some questions from online. There's two questions. Firstly, the tons of new discoveries net of write-downs of existing reserves in your slides.
Yeah. So the way we calculate those new copper discoveries, again, it's S&P data. And what we look at, we just compare. We've got some code that quickly writes that was written. We just compare previous years reported resource and reserves to what the company is reporting this year. So it includes those write-downs. It includes declines due to production. So all of that data is publicly available, and just quick, you can just quickly produce those charts with some simple code.
And the second question is related to Nick's question as well. Is much of the global resource distributed in small deposits that don't make sense as standalone mines?
Yeah, look, that's true. I can't give you any concrete numbers, but yeah, there'll be a lot of smaller deposits in there. But there's pros and cons. I think we as an industry, need to look at this. Gone are the days, not so long ago, where we were all coveting those giant deposits. Those giant deposits often come with giant headaches and giant costs. Those smaller deposits in the right places can often make a lot more sense. So, there's, it's a trade-off, it's a balance. So some smaller deposits probably don't make sense to be mined. Some of them probably do make sense to be mined.
We have a question from Martin from the Soul Systems. Thanks for the informative presentation, Russ. How is progress in developing better recycling practices in the near future? How may that suppress more investment in exploration in copper deposits? See an impact there?
I do, but I'm like, yeah, bring it on. I think the goal, our goal, the collective goal as an industry to support society isn't to say we shouldn't be recycling. I mean, come on, this is a great thing, and I expect and I hope that more recycling becomes more widespread. I'm certain it will. It is quite challenging to meet. Really at the moment there isn't enough metal that we can recycle today to meet demand, to completely replace metal that we're mining. But the amount of metal we can recycle each year will increase and start to have a bigger and bigger impact. I believe I got the numbers roughly right that in recent years, about 20%, 15 to 20% of global demand is from recycled metal. I'll be very surprised and very disappointed if that proportion doesn't increase. But I'm like, bring it on. Yeah, it's good.
We have one more question from Grant Valentine, who says, thank you for an amazing presentation and this forthcoming blind question. The demand figures you referenced from S&P are significantly lower than the demand that Simon Michaud predicted in his seminar last year. How confident are we in future copper demand for zero emissions technology?
Yeah, great question. Me personally, not very confident. There's a lot of uncertainty. Very confident that demand will increase, with or without increased demand from linked to the energy transition, but just how much is demand going to increase? There's so much uncertainty. So many things can kind of impact that. Look what COVID did. What the war in Ukraine is doing. There's so many things that can really impact demand. Substitution may factor in. If it just gets too expensive, to purchase the copper to get into the batteries, how is substitution going to impact, the demand? So a lot of uncertainty. And I'm, sure, people a lot smarter than me are putting a lot of time and effort looking at this, but we know the demand's going to increase, but how much? I would take every forecast with a pinch of salt.
I wanted to touch on a couple of things to come back to Lisa's question. We tried to kind of, when we did that analysis in 2018, we tried to look at different copper assets and say, well, what will be the challenges associated with extracting copper from these different deposits? And the only indicator I could find in the S&P was they have a field in their geology section where it lists the number of copper minerals. And I assume that if there were 5 copper minerals, then you might have more trouble than if there was 1. And that's all I could find in that S&P global data set that would allow you to do that. So I think it'd be a big job I've got an important one to try to estimate which deposits had a big challenge. But but the question I wanted to ask you was, this is something that we thought about a lot, that what you presented is exactly, I think, lots of good approaches to improve the way companies do project development and increase mineral supply and that sort of thing. But I wonder sometimes whether it's like the equivalent of saying, I'm going to get from point A to point B on a horse. I'm going to get my horse to go 10% faster. And then someone else comes and says, you know what, I'm going to fly. And I just wonder if all of these challenges that we're going through is a symptom of an industry that is ripe for total disruption. And I know that I saw Andy's on the line. I agree with Andy that probably is, at least for some of these deposits, the 35% of global copper that's inaccessible due to this combination of challenges. But I'd be interested to hear your comments on that.
Yeah, look, I think very perceptive. I would agree. When's that disruption going to come? Don't know. I hope it comes from within. I hope I'm part of that disruption. But yeah, there's so many opportunities to improve the way we do things. A lot of the things we do is pretty archaic, kind of baked in, well, this is how we've always done it. So yeah, massive opportunities. And look, anything that helps us meet that future demand, again, bring it on.
My thanks for a really interesting thought-provoking talk. We always say talks are thought-provoking, but this really was. To a comment and a question. The comment is to thank you on behalf of everyone here, particularly the students, for reminding us so well that you should never take data presented by others, without questioning it. There is a difference between 1 million and 500 million tons of copper, and it all depends, as you say, on how you define it. So I think that's something we tend to forget. And also, of course, you can turn that around if you want to make the point, we present it in the way that suits you. So there are a couple of lessons there. The question for you, I was really struck, and we've always seen this before, it's a well-known correlation, the correlation between price and spend. It's absolutely one-to-one, except it's offset by the 2 years that it takes to persuade the board to spend more money. Isn't it really time we should be going for the negative correlation rather than the positive one? Spend the money when the price is low, and then you found the stuff and you're running it when the price gets high. It sounds simplistic, but that correlation is absolutely amazingly tight. Yeah, look, I would agree. And yeah, we would love to be counter-cyclical. A couple of off-the-cuff thoughts about this. So one interesting thing is, and stat which I didn't show, is that for the last 25 years or so, about 60% of significant copper discoveries have been made by juniors, smaller companies. Really tough for them to be counter-cyclical. They need those investment dollars to be able to get out there and do that work. And so that's one of the reasons why, we see this link, this frustrating correlation that uptick in discoveries when prices are high. But yeah, you guys would be putting money into this small players. Yeah, as we do. So it's definitely part of the strategy, and boils down to realizing any discoveries that we make, they may well take a long time to get into production. We're actually quite proud of some efforts we've got at the moment of reducing those timelines. But it's a hard reality. New discoveries can take longer to get into production. So trying to cast the net wide, make our own discoveries, tap into other people's discoveries. But the competition's tight. So it's again easier said than done. But what makes this industry interesting?
Thank you. Great talk. The question that really intrigues me and is resonating in my head is your earliest proposed one of how much copper is there in the globe. It brought me to sort of think, is there anything in planet formation theory that says, you know what, here is the amount that should be there? And then it's the economic challenge of where is it and can we get to it? Coming at it from the opposite end of the spectrum, where get out in the field and start looking and taking samples. So that was the thing that struck me most of all.
Thanks, but I would just reiterate, there is more than enough copper out there. We don't need to worry about how many copper atoms are out there, how much copper is actually out there. There is a lot in known resources. New significant discoveries continue to be made. The real challenge is, how do you get them into production? How do you get that community support? How do you not screw up the environment to help meet demand?
Hi, Russ. Yeah, fantastic talk. I think at SMI, you'll know that we would probably switch your statement about the right deposits in the right places around to the right deposits approached in the right way by us, by the industry. So I think the idea of it being the right place, as you touched on, as you were hinting at, is dynamic and changing, and in 100 years' time, the wrong places now might be the right places. The right places now can come back and bite us. That really isn't what we do have to do as an industry has to hold our hands up and say, okay, we realise in the past we've got this wrong from a community and environmental perspective. How do we do this in the right way, even in the different places? So I'm just wondering, what's Rio's broad perspective on that?
Look, I would 100% agree. I would say, look, from an exploration point of view, there is plenty of areas where categorically we will not explore. National parks, just very sensitive areas environmentally, culturally. Nobody's going to want to mine below Brisbane city centre, so you can quickly kind of reduce the search space significantly. But there are plenty of other areas where it's kind of grey, and we don't want to limit ourselves and assume that the community wouldn't want us to develop a mine there, or that the environmental challenges can't be overcome. And this mine can actually have I would say, a net positive impact on the environment. So we're quite careful, in prioritising where we explore. Some areas clear no-goes, but other areas really just comes down to quite detailed community consultation, really trying to understand the nuance of that deposit and the nuance of that local environment, the local community. And again, as you pointed out, the situation can change, especially over the decades, that the timelines that we deal with, that community situation, the political situation, the technology available to unlock value in a deposit can change a lot. So yeah, very dynamic, and we don't want to be too dogmatic about where we shouldn't explore or where we should explore.
Well, I think that's all we've got time for this morning. I'd like you all to join me to thank Russ once again.